For 30 long years, Eleanor Voss nurtured a secret. She was a widow, known for her grace, the keeper of her late husband's memory, but also the silent bearer of a betrayal that had shattered her world decades ago. The townsfolk admired her resilience, attributing her solitude to the lingering grief of her husband, Robert's untimely death. What they didn't know was that Robert had left her with more than memories. He'd left her with a wound so deep it had turned into an obsession for vengeance. Back in 1973, Eleanor had been the darling of their town, married to Robert, a charismatic businessman. But while he projected a picture of a perfect life, his affairs were as numerous as they were indiscreet. Eleanor had learned of his betrayals in fragments, whispers in bars, stray glimpses in the shadowed corners of restaurants. Despite her heartbreak, she had always presented a loyal front, convinced he would change. But Robert had flaunted his infidelities one too many times, breaking Eleanor in ways even he could not fathom. When he died suddenly in a car accident on a winter night in 1981, she attended his funeral in a black veil, her grief expertly performed, her rage hidden beneath layers of stoic sorrow. After his death, she discovered that his final lover, a young woman named Cora Levine, had been gifted the deed to a cabin Robert had promised her, a secluded retreat in the mountains Eleanor had believed was theirs alone. This betrayal, even in death, became the singular force driving her. Eleanor swore to herself that Cora would pay, but she knew she had to wait. A woman scorned might find justice in a single night, but a woman betrayed would take her time. Years passed. Cora, oblivious to Eleanor's seething wrath, moved into the cabin with her own family. Eleanor, meanwhile, grew close to her. They shared tea and talks, Eleanor's warm smile concealing her intentions. Cora had no reason to suspect Eleanor's attentions were anything but innocent, that her companionship was forged not out of kindness, but out of a need to set the perfect stage for revenge. In 2011, Cora's husband died. Cora, now in her 60s, turned to Eleanor for solace, leaning on her new friend for support. Eleanor, patient as ever, listened with rapt attention. It was then she began her plan, taking meticulous notes of Cora's growing dependence on her, her vulnerabilities. Finally, one cold autumn day in 2013, Eleanor set her trap. She invited Cora to spend a few days at the mountain cabin for one final retreat to ease her grief. Eleanor prepared everything with deliberate care. The wine, the comforting atmosphere, the bedroom meticulously adorned with reminders of Robert's presence in the cabin. She led Cora into a subtle delirium, evoking memories of their shared betrayal, suggesting Robert's lingering ghost, feeding her aged friend just enough wine to muddle her mind. As the night wore on, Eleanor spun a tale, coaxing from Cora confessions of her affair with Robert, details she had long buried. Cora, under Eleanor's sympathetic, relentless guidance, broke down, confessing everything Eleanor had waited years to hear. It was then that Eleanor revealed her own agony, her hate, her plan. In her fury, she laughed, the bitterness of 30 years unleashed in a torrent. Cora's last moments were filled with Eleanor's calm words. The poisoned wine, carefully crafted from a rare, slow-acting toxin Eleanor had acquired after years of research, took its toll, leaving Cora weakened, disoriented, helpless. When the authorities found her, Eleanor wept on cue, recounting how Cora had died of a heart attack, devastated by memories of a lost love. And the town, seeing the widow's grief, once again bought the story. Eleanor returned to her life, a new sense of freedom filling the spaces left empty by years of waiting. She had made good on her silent vow. Justice, she thought, was served best after a lifetime of suffering. Months after Cora's death, Eleanor returned to her carefully curated routine, maintaining her role as the quiet, dignified widow who had survived more loss than most could bear. She kept up appearances, receiving sympathy, feigning sadness when neighbors spoke of poor Cora's lonely passing. Yet, beneath her composed exterior, Eleanor felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, a quiet, cruel victory over the betrayal that had haunted her for so long. However, the peace she expected didn't come. In the weeks that followed, something else did, a series of mysterious messages. It started with a letter slipped under her door, unsigned and typed in bold, unadorned letters. "Did you think no one would know?" Eleanor froze, her heart pounding, as she read and reread the words. She dismissed it as a prank, a misunderstanding, even a strange joke. But a part of her felt a sliver of panic creep in, knowing she had left no trace, no clue of her vengeance. How could anyone possibly know? Over the next few days, more notes appeared. One was left in her mailbox, another inside a book she had borrowed from the library, and another on her windshield as she left the grocery store. Each message grew darker, more accusing. "Justice is a circle, Eleanor." And another. Cora was not the only one who knew. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt fear. She locked her doors at night, checked the windows twice before bed, and constantly looked over her shoulder when she was out. Yet nothing else unusual happened. Only the arrival of the notes continued, steady as a metronome, relentless as her own decades-long resolve had once been. It was as though someone was haunting her, shadowing her every move, whispering to her from just beyond reach. Then one night, Eleanor woke with a start. She was sure she had heard a noise from downstairs, a shuffling sound as though someone were moving around in her living room. She listened, heart pounding, until silence returned. Convinced her mind was playing tricks on her, she lay back down but couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The next morning, she found something chilling, an old photograph of Robert, young and vibrant, taken at the cabin he had shared with Cora. The photo, which she knew she had burned years ago in a fit of rage, now lay on her dining table, perfectly intact, with a new message scrawled on the back. "I remember, Eleanor. Do you?" Eleanor's blood ran cold. Someone was in her house, someone who had access to her memories, her secrets. In her desperation, she hired a private investigator, a man named Victor Marks, who had a reputation for being thorough and discreet. She told him she was being harassed, stalked even, though she left out certain details about Cora's death, explaining only that she feared someone from Robert's past might be out for revenge. Victor took her case with a serious nod, immediately examining the notes, dusting for fingerprints, checking her home for any signs of forced entry. But each time he checked, he found nothing. No leads, no clues, no indication of anyone lurking. Days stretched into weeks, and Eleanor's anxiety grew. She barely slept, losing weight, haunted by thoughts of Cora, of Robert, and of this unknown figure haunting her life. One evening, Victor returned with a grim look in his eye. "Mrs. Voss," he began, his voice hesitant, "I've done extensive digging, as you asked. I found something unexpected." He handed her a thin file containing information on Cora Levine, a death certificate, a funeral date, and records from the small mountain town near the cabin. But what caught Eleanor's eye was a detail she hadn't known. Cora, too, had lost a husband young, under mysterious circumstances, and had lived her life shrouded in whispered rumors of vengeance, of retribution for an old betrayal. Eleanor felt her skin prickle. Could Cora have shared her obsession with vengeance? Could her spirit linger, taking its revenge from beyond the grave? The final message arrived on a stormy night, tucked under her pillow, so close it sent a chill down her spine. This one was scrawled in a woman's looping handwriting, barely legible in smudged ink. "Justice waits, Eleanor. You're next." In that moment, Eleanor realized what her life had become, a reflection of her own dark intentions, a shadow she had created through the unforgiving, patient rage that had defined her. Whether someone knew her secret or it was some twist of fate, she had no idea. But it didn't matter. Cora's silent revenge had found her, and Eleanor knew her punishment had only begun. And as the shadows grew around her, as every creak and whisper became the echo of her own long-sought vengeance, Eleanor realized that in chasing justice, she had awakened her own worst nightmare, one that would haunt her until her last breath. Eleanor's world unraveled rapidly in the weeks following the last, sinister note. Sleep eluded her, and shadows clung to every corner of her life. The once orderly home felt cold and foreign, as though every inch was imbued with Cora's lingering presence. She began to hear Cora's voice in the wind at night, a faint mocking echo of the words from that last note. "You're next." Desperate to escape the torment, Eleanor decided to leave town, thinking distance would free her from the relentless hauntings. She booked a room in an old hotel a few hours away, a quiet place where no one knew her, hoping the change of scenery would give her peace. But her journey took a darker turn almost as soon as she arrived. She found a familiar figure sitting in the lobby, Victor Marks, her investigator. He was sipping a drink, casually scanning a newspaper. When he noticed her, he approached, his face solemn. "Mrs. Voss," he began quietly, "I have one last thing I need to show you. I think you'll want to see this." He handed her a manila envelope, heavier than the others. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a police report she hadn't seen before, detailing a case from nearly 30 years ago. It was a cold case on her own husband's death, the car accident she had always believed was the result of icy roads. But the report suggested otherwise. New evidence, recently discovered, indicated that his brakes had been tampered with. It hadn't been an accident. "Who would have wanted Robert dead?" Victor asked, his eyes fixed on Eleanor. Eleanor felt a surge of cold understanding. She had long believed that her own suffering had ended with Robert's death, but she realized now that someone had preempted her revenge all those years ago. Someone else had shared her hatred for him. Someone had beaten her to the act, and she had never even suspected it. As she absorbed this revelation, Victor continued. "And there's one more thing," he said, his voice low. He handed her a small envelope, addressed in her own handwriting. Her heart raced as she read the letter inside. Her own words, written to Cora nearly 30 years before, when she'd first uncovered Robert's affair. She had sent it in a fury, detailing her hatred for him and her longing for a life without him. It was a bitter, angry letter, one she had forgotten about long ago. But Cora had kept it, and now it had returned to haunt her. With a voice barely above a whisper, Eleanor asked, "Why would Cora keep this?" Victor's gaze was unflinching. "I believe she kept it as a reminder, a bond perhaps, a reason to carry out an unspoken pact." The realization washed over Eleanor. Cora had killed Robert, fulfilling a revenge she herself had only dared to dream of. And Eleanor's own words, her confessions, had been the seed that had taken root in Cora's heart, inspiring her to act. Cora had carried out the vengeance, but Eleanor's guilt was equal, if not greater. She had willed Robert's death into being. Unable to bear the weight of it all, Eleanor sank to her knees. She understood now that Cora's spirit, whether real or conjured by her own remorse, wasn't haunting her out of revenge. It was a reminder, an endless echo of her own dark desire, her complicity in Robert's death. And the terrible irony was that the justice she had sought all these years had already been served by her own hand, albeit indirectly. Victor's voice broke the silence. "Mrs. Voss, sometimes justice is simply the truth we refuse to see." Eleanor left the hotel that night, but she knew she could never truly escape. She returned home, living out her days as a shadow of herself. In her quiet, empty house, she no longer feared the creaks or whispers that filled the rooms. They were not Cora's, nor Robert's, nor anyone else's but her own. The haunting of a conscience that had lain dormant for 30 years, now fully awake. She understood now that justice had indeed come full circle, and in the end, it was not Cora who punished her, nor Robert, nor some vengeful spirit. Her punishment was her life, a slow decay haunted by the truth of her own making. Eleanor Voss, once a woman consumed by vengeance, was now left to be her own warden, imprisoned by the silent but unbreakable chains of her guilt.